Hello and welcome, dear 1000 PS friends. I'm Wolf, and today I've got something very special for you because hardly any adventure bike caused more of a stir at EICMA last year than the CFMoto 1000MT-X. It's a fully equipped motorcycle at an absolute bargain price, and today I went to find out just how good cheap can be. I found positive things, I found negative things, and if you want to hear about both, then stay with us because this really is a bike worth looking at in detail. Yes, the CFMoto 1000MT-X didn't only create excitement among the audience, because I think one or two competitors also got a little bit nervous when they saw how CFMoto presented this bike. And from the reactions from all of you, it was obvious that the interest was huge. That made me even happier that I already had the chance today here in southern Styria and across the border in neighboring Slovenia to ride this bike properly for a full day and really get a feel for it. We'll be having it again at the editorial office, and the other colleagues from 1000 PS will also ride it, so this definitely won't be the last time you hear about it from us. But today I had the pleasure of collecting the very first impressions for myself, the first proper riding impressions, and that is always something special. And the question is, why is there so much fuss around this motorcycle in the first place? Why has it already become such a talking point before many people have even ridden it properly? Quite simply because CFMoto is calling out a seriously aggressive price for it. And that's why today I'm not starting with the engine and not with the chassis, but with the price, because that really is, as we like to say, hot. Right now, in April, there is a launch offer at 10,999 euros in Austria and an almost unbelievable 9,999 euros in Germany. That won't remain the price forever. From the 1st of May, the whole thing costs another 1,000 more, which is still cheap when you look at everything you get with it. I'll come back to that in a moment because the equipment list really is part of the story here. So then it will cost 10,999 euros in Germany and 11,999 euros in Austria. And the way this bike is standing here now, with the solid engine protection, with the center stand and with a pannier set, you pay another 2,000 euros on top. But then you really do have the complete no worries travel package. And that's actually the point with this bike. Even when you start adding sensible extras, it still remains very attractively priced. Today we rode without panniers, at least I did. One or two colleagues had the cases fitted, and we had some genuinely inviting roads in front of us. We started on the South Styrian Wine Road, on small, narrow, winding roads, and then we crossed over into Slovenia, which in that border region is a real gravel paradise. And there we really had exactly the kind of roads and tracks that are interesting for a bike like this, and the kind of terrain you actually want to ride on a machine like this. There was a bit of everything: small back roads, flowing bends, broken surfaces, gravel climbs, loose sections, and exactly the sort of mixed riding that tells you very quickly whether an adventure bike is just good on paper or whether it actually works in the real world. And on those roads and on those gravel sections, it really did feel very much at home. So what do you get as standard? Heated grips, a heated seat, a steering damper, a Bosch 6-axis IMU, and with that come lean sensitive assistance systems, so cornering ABS and lean sensitive traction control. There's an 8-inch color TFT display with a touchscreen, and it can do Apple CarPlay. That means I can connect my phone wirelessly, connect my iPhone wirelessly, use navigation, use all my apps. And for example, I can ride using Google Maps without having to download some expensive navigation software from somewhere else. It works without a cable, and honestly, I can't think of a second motorcycle or a second motorcycle manufacturer where that works wirelessly in quite that way, and especially at this price point, that really does stand out. And the touchscreen itself works wonderfully. The Chinese really can do this stuff. All of this electronic equipment, they really can do it. They're quick, they're clear, they're modern, and you can tell they know how people use this kind of tech in everyday life. If you don't have an iPhone, if you've got an Android smartphone, then you need the CFMoto app. But even then, you can still use your apps, or at least mirror them, and use navigation that way. You just need the separate app for it. On the iPhone, it works directly. But now that I've shown you all those extras and explained them, I'd still say let's move on to what is most important on a motorcycle. At the end of the day, that's still the engine. And the CFMoto 1000MT-X is powered by a pure twin with 946 cubic centimeters, producing 112 horsepower at 8,500 revolutions per minute. Maximum torque is 105 Newton meters, arriving at 6,500 revolutions per minute. And this engine, if I compare it, for example, with the engine in the KTM 890, with what you could call the sister model, if you like, goes about its work a bit more gently. It doesn't attack you in the same way. It doesn't feel as edgy. It's a bit calmer, a bit smoother, and in that sense, perhaps a bit more accessible for many riders. It's a bit less aggressive. As you know, KTM is not everybody's cup of tea. Some people love that character, others less so. And this engine here may have more power on paper, but to me it feels a little more rounded, a little smoother, a little more civilized in the way it delivers. It feels a bit more grown up, a bit more polished, and a bit less keen to constantly kick you forward. And it's also no longer like it often used to be with CFMoto engines or with Chinese motorcycles in general, where you had a really jerky throttle response. Yes, at low revs, in the occasional tricky off-road passage, there is now and then a somewhat abrupt little burst of acceleration, but all of that is still well within the green zone. It really didn't bother me in any serious way. The quick shifter works wonderfully, by the way, with blipper function going up and down. There's really nothing to complain about there. I hardly had to touch the clutch today. It genuinely works very well, and that simply makes a day like this more relaxed and more enjoyable. And we also have proper suspension travel, which of course you need if you're going to leave the tarmac. We've got 230 millimeters of suspension travel front and rear. So the promises are not just visual, the bike really does bring proper off-road hardware to the table. It uses KYB suspension, fully adjustable at both ends, in rebound, compression and preload. And for preload there's a practical hand wheel which makes life easier. So in terms of hardware, it really does tick all the boxes with a 48mm fork as well. But even though I've already said there is plenty of light here, there are also shadows. And strangely enough, those shadows appeared precisely when we left the paved road behind and headed onto the gravel. That's odd because on gravel this motorcycle actually feels very, very comfortable, and on the hardware side it has wonderful ingredients. It wants to be ridden there, it looks right there, it sits right there. But when it comes to the calibration, when it comes to the software tuning, there is still some catching up to do. We have 4 riding modes, actually it will become 5. We have a standard mode, a rain mode, an off-road mode and an all-terrain mode. And in addition to that, there will also be a freely configurable user mode, but that isn't in this bike yet. So the basic package is already brought, but one important part is still on the way. That's supposed to arrive within the next few weeks. And I have to say quite honestly, what sounds brilliant on paper was not really that harmonious in practice and not really that convincing. First of all, I mean the ABS, which for my taste regulates a little too early. It can be like that, it doesn't have to be like that, that's my opinion. But in itself, that still isn't the big issue. You can live with that. The thing that really bothered me was the traction control in off-road mode. A brief word on the traction control itself. In standard mode, I can switch it on and off, but I can't change the intensity. In rain mode, it is always on the highest level, level 3. So in principle, the traction control has 3 levels. In rain mode, you cannot intervene, which also makes sense. And in off-road mode, I can choose between 3, 2 and 1. And then I can also switch the traction control off completely. And I have to tell you honestly, we turned off onto gravel quite early, rode up a steep gravel section, and half the group came to a halt because with the traction control active, it simply would not climb anymore. That is exactly the sort of situation where an off-road mode should help you, and here it really didn't. In rougher, steeper gravel, it is basically unrideable with the traction control on. And even in level 1, even if you go right down to the least intrusive setting, you still have to switch it off. You simply have to know that. I realized that pretty quickly, and then I switched over immediately and turned it off straight away. In off-road mode, you can do that while riding. In off-road mode, you can also deactivate the rear wheel ABS, so then you have a kind of off-road ABS, and then it works. Once that intervention is gone, then you once again have this wonderful hardware package underneath you, and it simply drives up the hill. The engine is great, the suspension is great, and then everything comes together. Then the bike suddenly feels exactly as it should have felt from the start. But really the smartest thing is just to switch directly into all-terrain mode, because in that mode everything is deactivated. The traction control is off, the ABS front and rear is off, so if you want some front wheel ABS, then you need to choose off-road mode and then switch the traction control right down, or rather right off. And because we were riding in a group where there would be a short stretch of tarmac and then another off-road section again straight afterwards, I ended up spending the whole day in this all-terrain mode. It was simply the least stressful solution, because it would simply have been too annoying for me to keep switching the traction control back on again and then off again. again. I'd put it this way, if you can ride a motorcycle properly, then on a 112 horsepower bike you don't really need traction control. It's good that it has it, and of course it is a safety feature, and if you do have it, then it should work properly, and here CFMoto really still needs to work on that. There are many manufacturers, well-established manufacturers, that can do this properly, where off-road you still get traction, you still get slip, you can drift nicely, and you can actually play with the traction control across different fine settings. There it supports you. Here in reality the only solution is to switch it off. There's no joy in turning onto gravel on this bike with the traction control active. Believe me, that simply does not work. It doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel helpful, and above all it doesn't feel as though the software is matching the quality of the hardware. But it's not the end of the world either, because CFMoto is aware of it. Today we were also able to speak with the people responsible, at least for the German-speaking market. They know about it and they are working on it. And CFMoto now has a development center in Salzburg where quite a few people are working who not that long ago were also under contract with KTM. They know what they are doing, and I'm assuming that improvements will come in the foreseeable future. We were also told that, and perhaps the riding presentation came a little too early, because you do have to say quite honestly that the traction control as it is currently calibrated does not work off-road. On the road, all right, it still intervenes too early as well, at least for my taste, but that becomes a matter of taste because it is a safety feature. Off-road, however, in the current form, it simply gets in the way. But now I've spent long enough talking about what is, from my point of view, the biggest weakness. Because once you switch it off, the bike is enormous fun. It just doesn't make much sense to have it if you immediately need to turn it off. So yes, there is still some catching up to do here compared with the market leaders, but equally, and that matters, the basic motorcycle underneath is good enough that it is really worth improving this part properly. But CFMoto does have the advantage that they can push the whole thing to the bike over the air. That means you don't have to ride to a workshop if you own a CFMoto. You simply connect your phone to the bike, download the update, and then you've got the newest software on it again. And that was promised to us that this should happen soon. So CFMoto Europe is really pushing for the Chinese side to get on with it, because it would be a shame. This is a wonderful motorcycle on which there is actually very little to criticize. I mean, just look at it. It isn't finished any worse than the products from the established manufacturers. I really went looking for things that I might dislike, for any detail that might seem cheap or unfinished. I looked closely, because with a cheap motorcycle, that's exactly what you expect to find somewhere. And if I had to name one thing, then perhaps up here at the front, where the crash bar is bolted together in this rather visible way, that might perhaps have been solved a little more elegantly, but that is already about it. And when I think back to what Chinese motorcycles used to be like only a few years ago, and where they still felt a bit less substantial and a bit less premium, then where we are now is genuinely sensational. The progress really is enormous. And CFMoto has ambitious goals. This morning before we set off, they showed us a little bit about market share. In recent years, they have really stepped on the gas. They were already at 3% market share last year. The goal for this year is 5%. And by 2028, they want to reach 10% market share. And I'd say with motorcycles like this, that really is possible if they do their homework and if they simply get this last bit under control. Namely, the fact that the calibration is not yet at the level of one or two other manufacturers who, and this also has to be said, play in a completely different price league. Because here we really do have wonderful components. I haven't even mentioned the Brembo brakes yet. Up front, there are two 320mm discs, and at the rear one 260mm disc, and they work very well with strong and consistent stopping power. The brake feel is good, the stopping power is there, and that fits the rest of the bike. And while I'm already touching the tire here, the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR is a very, very good adventure tire as original equipment. That also tells you something about the ambition behind the project. And no longer some Chinese clone like the one fitted to the 450MT and to the 800MT-X, at least up until last year. So here you get a tire that looks the part and that, yes, probably has more of its strengths on the road, but can still handle the kind of roads and trails we rode today absolutely well. And there were definitely some steeper passages in there and even one or two little single tracks, and it coped just fine. We were lucky that it stayed dry. Had it been wet, the tire would probably already have found its limits on some of those sections. But in the dry, it fitted the day perfectly. In fact, the whole ride fitted perfectly, and in many respects the motorcycle fitted perfectly too. As I said, on the hardware side, this gets a thumbs up from me. On the software side or in the calibration, they still need to improve, and we were promised that this will happen soon. The seat height of the 1000 MT-X is 875 millimeters, so it really is quite tall. That is something you notice immediately before you even ride away. I can't demonstrate it properly right now because we are standing on the center stand, but I can tell you this much. With my height of 1.75 m, I don't really get both feet down properly, not even truly onto the balls of my feet. That means I need to slide my backside a little to one side in order to get one foot planted properly. It's manageable, but shorter riders will definitely want to think about it. But in the accessories catalog, there is also a lower seat by 20 millimeters. With that, I then get down with the balls of my feet, or almost. That gives you 855 millimeters. And there is also a seat 15 millimeters higher. So then you are at 890 millimeters seat height. And from about August, there should also be a lower version of the bike itself, roughly 40 millimeters lower. That will of course come at the expense of suspension travel. Then we will probably be at about 190 millimeters front and rear, perhaps 200 millimeters. So then you won't have quite the same off-road reserves that this motorcycle definitely has in this taller form. As always, it's a trade-off between accessibility and ultimate off-road capability. And when I'm sitting on it now, the standing position is also really good. For me, it is nearly perfect. You can ride actively in the standing position as well. The ergonomics makes sense, and that is incredibly important on an adventure bike like this. And because in my opinion, the bike is a little more front heavy than the comparable KTM, which also has the low slung fuel tank, it almost tips into corners that tiny little bit more easily. I honestly think it is just a touch more agile than the KTM 890 or the Husqvarna 901, although there's not much in it. The low slung tank also has the advantage of a low center of gravity, of course. The tank holds 22.5 liters. CFMoto states fuel consumption at 4.6 liters. I think something a bit above 5 liters is more realistic. Today the display showed 6.3 liters for me. That was certainly on the high side, but we also gave it some stick now and then. And with those off-road stretches, you naturally use more fuel. So I'd say realistically maybe 5.5 liters, and then you can cover about 400 kilometers on a tank. For travel, that is excellent. That's exactly the sort of range you want when you're heading off for longer tours. Just as excellent is the payload, namely 243 kilograms, and that really is impressive. There are not many adventure bikes with such a proud payload figure. The bike's own weight is 199 kilograms dry, which means 222 kilograms fully fueled and ready to ride. That's right in the range where all the others in this class sit, the adventure bikes that this one is aiming at. Because I'd say the CFMoto 1000 MT-X will not only have the KTM 890 as a rival, if you like, but also a Honda Africa Twin, a Ducati DesertX, a Suzuki V-Strom 800DE, which might sit a little lower in power, but in terms of weight also plays in this class, or a Triumph Tiger 900 Rally Pro. So this vehicle class, this premium middleweight adventure travel segment, that is where CFMoto now wants to establish itself as well. And I think they really do have a good product here, one that genuinely can compete. It doesn't need to hide, and that in itself is already quite a statement. The service interval at 15,000 kilometers or once a year is also suitably long for travel and long distance use, so to speak. And while I'm sitting here and looking ahead, the screen itself isn't the biggest, but wind protection is decent. And you can adjust it quite easily with one hand even while riding. These wind deflectors here also protect the upper body. I'm 1.75 m, and for me, even the lower position was all right. But today, we were not riding at motorway speeds. We were mainly on small country roads. We'll definitely look at that more closely as well, because, as I said, the bike will certainly be with us again one time or another. In the editorial office, we have a 5-year warranty on this motorcycle, or 40,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. So that is all a good story. It all fits a travel bike very well. Now they basically only have to get those calibration issues under control. And then in my opinion, there is nothing at all standing in the way of an adventure bike from China like this one. then the whole package becomes not only attractive on paper, but truly convincing in practice as well. And when you buy a motorcycle like this, everything always stands or falls with the support and with the dealer network. And we were assured quite credibly that this network is steadily growing, that it is already really quite solid in the German-speaking region, and that spare parts supply is there and dependable, because there is nothing worse than having weather like this and maybe not being able to ride because some part is not available. But behind CFMoto there is a huge corporation, and I do trust them to get that under control as well. As I said, the panniers, the center stand and the crash bars are extras, and they are definitely extras worth recommending, because those panniers are very nicely lined on the inside as well. So when you put something in there, nothing rattles around the way it does in many other aluminum cases. They're not the biggest cases in the world, especially on the exhaust side, but for a tour they are a good solution. I've already used these panniers on the 800MT-X in Romania, so I know they do a good job. They're robust, they're very stable, and the quality is good. I like them, and that too matters, because on a travel bike it's often the practical everyday details that decide whether you really enjoy living with it. So if you enjoyed this video, if it gave you information that you found interesting and useful, then please do us a favor and leave a thumbs up for CFMoto and for me. Write in the comments below what you think about Chinese motorcycles in general and about the CFMoto 1000MT-X in particular. Maybe you've already ordered one, maybe you want to take one for a test ride. I'd be very interested to know, and if you haven't done it yet, subscribe to our channel. It doesn't cost anything and it makes us very happy. See you next time.